Picture the cliche midlife crisis. A guy hits, 45 or 50, suddenly panics, buys a cherry red Porsche, completely overhauls his wardrobe, and
Tries
just
desperately to outrun his own shadow.
right. Exactly. And society essentially treats this whole thing as a punchline. We're told a man in midlife is either, well, a joke who's running away from his age, or he's just quietly giving up.
Yeah, sliding into irrelevance.
Totally. But what if that sudden overwhelming panic isn't a joke at all? I mean, what if it's actually the body and the mind staging a massive overdue intervention?
It completely changes the paradigm because when you look past the sitcom tropes and, actually examine the psychology of what a man goes through during this transition,
The sports car narrative just falls apart.
it really does. It's actually a profound missed opportunity for genuine growth. Midlife isn't a crisis to escape, and it certainly isn't a decline to just endure. It is a fundamental redefinition of what strength actually looks like.
And redefining that strength is really our mission for today's deep dive, whether you're in your 30s and just, starting to see this on the horizon, or you're 50 and right in the thick of it.
Or frankly, even if you're just curious about human development.
Yeah. We are going to deconstruct the myth of the midlife crisis. Our source for this is a really compelling 2026 manuscript by Coach Shaun Smit, and it's called 90 Daily Reflections for Men in Midlife.
And Coach Shaun brings an incredibly unique, multifaceted perspective to this. If you look at his background, he has decades of experience spanning ministry, high-level executive coaching, and competitive rugby.
Wow, that is quite the mix.
Right. So he understands extreme physical performance, but he combines it with this deep spiritual and psychological insight. He's looking specifically at what happens when a man whose entire life has been defined by performance, output, and ego.
Has to transition into a life anchored in presence.
Exactly. Presence and quiet strength. It's a 90-day roadmap, moving from who you were to who you need to become.
Okay, let's unpack this. The journey really begins with this incredibly quiet, unannounced arrival. I mean, there's no buzzer that goes off when you enter midlife.
No, definitely not.
Coach Shaun points out that the transition almost always starts with subtle signals, mostly physical ones. It's where the body simply stops negotiating and starts insisting.
That phrasing is crucial. Starts insisting. For the first half of a man's life, the body is basically a machine to be driven. You negotiate with it.
Like, I know we only got 4 hours of sleep, but we have a massive presentation today.
Right. Drink this coffee and power through. And the body complies. But eventually, that negotiation ends. The body stops asking and starts dictating terms.
I think every guy has experienced that sudden, frustrating betrayal. You sleep at a slightly weird angle, and suddenly your neck is out of commission for 3 days.
Oh, absolutely.
Or you go play a pickup game of basketball, and the soreness doesn't just fade the next morning. It lingers for half the week. And we are so deeply conditioned to view that slower recovery as a weakness.
It feels like the machine is breaking down.
Yeah. But Coach Shaun completely reframes that physical shift. He argues that this isn't weakness, it is communication.
Think about what your body has absorbed over the last few decades. The stress, the sleep debt, the constant low-grade hum of anxiety, the endless hurrying.
It's constant output.
When your body finally slows down, it's not failing you. It's demanding a partnership. It's telling you that you now have finite energy, which forces you to be incredibly deliberate about what actually deserves that energy.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like, think about being in your 20s and 30s as living on a biological and emotional credit card.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You are constantly swiping it. You're borrowing energy, borrowing resilience, borrowing stamina from your future self just to keep pushing your career or building your life. And then midlife hits. And it's not a breakdown.
It's just the bill finally coming due.
Exactly.
You've been paying the minimum balance on your nervous system for 20 years, and now the principal is owed. And the way that bill usually presents itself is through a very specific kind of exhaustion. Coach Shaun describes it as a fatigue that sleep simply doesn't fix.
Which brings up a really important distinction. If a guy is listening to this right now, and he's feeling that profound, heavy fatigue where an 8-hour sleep doesn't even make a dent,
Yeah.
how does he know if he's actually entering a new season of wisdom or if he's just clinically burnt out and needs a month off to go to a beach?
What's fascinating here is that a beach vacation will cure physical exhaustion. If you just need a break from spreadsheets, a week in the sun works. But the midlife fatigue Coach Shaun describes is an existential weight.
Existential weight.
Yes, it's a quiet heaviness you carry because you're starting to realize that the old goals have lost their gravitational pull. You might have climbed the corporate ladder, provided for your family, built the exact life you set out to build at 25.
But you wake up one day and realize that achieving those things didn't solve the deeper questions.
Exactly.
It answers the question, can I do this? But it completely fails to answer, why am I doing this?
A vacation doesn't fix that. If sleep doesn't fix it, it's because you're carrying the weight of living at a pace and with a set of priorities that were never truly sustainable.
And guys are natural problem solvers, so that has to be frustrating.
It's incredibly frustrating. Coach Shaun says the goal isn't to fix or medicate this discomfort immediately. You actually have to sit with the tension. You have to find the wisdom hidden inside that existential fatigue instead of trying to hack your way out of it.
And that urge to, hack your way out of it leads directly to a massive trap he identifies. The myth of starting over.
Oh, yes, the fantasy of a clean slate.
When guys feel this deep, uncomfortable friction, the instinct is to burn the whole house down. That's where the sports car comes in. Or quitting the job on a whim, or blowing up a marriage, or moving across the country.
Because they think a new environment fixes the internal friction.
Right. But he argues that the idea of a clean slate is a total illusion.
Because escape doesn't resolve anything. If you blow up your life to start over, you're just relocating your unresolved patterns and your exhausted ego to a new zip code.
You can't unbecome who you are.
You really can't. Coach Shaun's point is that the goal isn't to start over. The goal is to start honest. You have to integrate your past, all the mistakes, the successes, the exhaustion.
Rather than trying to erase it and pretend you're 25 again.
Which requires an enormous amount of courage.
So what does this all mean for the guy who finally stops running? Because once you honestly acknowledge the physical and emotional limits of the season you're in, you're forced to stop and look at this incredibly heavy backpack of expectations you've been hauling around.
And you realize you have to start dropping things.
Yeah, this is where the real friction happens. Coach Shaun spends a massive portion of this roadmap focused entirely on the art of subtraction.
It's about consciously releasing the behaviors, the roles, and the mindsets that made you successful in the first half of life.
Because ironically, those exact same tools that built your success are the ones actively harming you now.
Let's talk about the biggest tool in that backpack, the hustle.
Oh, yeah.
Coach Shaun points out that the fundamental math of a man's life changes in midlife. In your 20s and 30s, the equation is simple. More effort equals more results.
You want a promotion. Work 80 hours instead of 40.
But in midlife, that math breaks down. More hours no longer equal more output. They just equal diminishing returns and a shattered nervous system.
The shift from building to sustaining.
Exactly. And you cannot sustain a life using the frantic energy it took to build it.
A huge part of that frantic energy is tied to something he calls impression management. He describes the need to impress and the need for approval as an incredibly expensive habit.
It really is.
Give me a concrete example of that, because I think a lot of guys do this all day long without even realizing the toll it's taking.
Well, impression management is the invisible mental math you do before every interaction. It's sitting in a meeting, not just listening to the problem, but calculating exactly what you need to say to ensure the boss thinks you're indispensable.
Ah, right. Performing for the room.
It's the guy who stays at the office until 7 at night, not because he actually has pending work, but because the VP is still walking the halls and he needs to be seen as the hardest worker.
Or curating your stories at a dinner party so other men know you're successful. That sounds absolutely exhausting when you lay it out like that.
It burns an unbelievable amount of daily battery. You are constantly calibrating your responses and monitoring everyone else's reactions to make sure the armor holds up.
And when you finally decide to drop that need for external approval, you inevitably start dropping the busyness that went with it.
Coach Shaun talks extensively about choosing depth over volume and breaking up with busyness.
Because for so many men, a packed calendar isn't a sign of productivity. It's a badge of honor. It proves you're needed.
Or worse, it's a defense mechanism. If you are double booked from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., you never have to face the uncomfortable silence. You never have to sit alone in a room and ask yourself those deep, terrifying questions about your purpose.
Busyness is the ultimate anesthetic.
Yes.
Okay, but isn't it terrifying to give that up? If a guy has built his entire identity around being the hardest worker in the room, telling him to shed the hustle and embrace silence must feel like jumping off a cliff without a parachute.
It's terrifying for a lot of men.
Coach Shaun even talks about having the courage to be ordinary.
Hmm.
And I want to push back on that a bit on behalf of the highly driven listener. In a culture that is absolutely obsessed with staying relevant, crushing goals, optimizing everything, isn't the courage to be ordinary just a polite, therapeutic way of saying a guy should give up and settle?
It sounds like it, right?
Yeah, how does a guy step out of performance mode without feeling like he's just becoming invisible?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is exactly the fear that keeps men trapped in the hustle. But Coach Shaun addresses this paradox beautifully. Shutting the hustle isn't about becoming empty, and it certainly isn't about becoming invisible or mediocre.
Okay, well, now what is it?
It is about becoming unencumbered. Think about how we define power in our youth. Power is taking action. It's dominating the conversation. It's proving you have the answer.
Always being the loudest in the room.
But Coach Shaun argues that in midlife, true strength starts to look like restraint.
Restrained. How so?
It takes far more self-control and far more internal power to sit in a tense room and not react, to not feel the desperate need to prove you are the smartest guy at the table,
Just observing instead of performing.
to not jump into the fray just to show you still can. The younger version of you needed to hustle to establish credibility. The older version already has the credibility, so you don't have to desperately defend it every 5 minutes.
I see. So by shedding that false urgency and that frantic need to constantly prove your worth, you aren't vanishing. You're actually taking all that scattered, anxious energy and concentrating it like a laser on the very few things that actually matter.
Precisely. As Coach Shaun notes, less becomes stronger. You stop measuring your worth by the sheer volume of tasks you complete or the accumulation of accolades, and you start measuring it by the depth of your presence.
So ordinary doesn't mean you stop achieving.
No, it means you no longer need the world to stand up and clap for your achievements. You're anchored.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Less is stronger. Because when you strip away the busyness, the ego-driven hustle, and the exhausting impression management, you do create a void. There is a profound silence where all that frantic noise used to be.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Right. But the beauty of this roadmap is that the void doesn't stay empty. It serves as the solid, quiet foundation for the man who is about to step forward in the final phase of this journey.
The emergence of quiet authority. And this really is the culmination of the work. It's stepping into a new, entirely sustainable identity. One that isn't defined by what you can extract from the world, but by the steady presence you offer to it.
Coach Shaun talks a lot about becoming a steady presence and a safe man. And I think this challenges how society generally views masculine power.
We often equate power with being loud, the guy who controls the room, the guy who dictates the terms.
But Coach Shaun argues for the immense, almost invisible value of a man being emotionally regulated.
A man whose mood does not dictate the temperature of the room. That is the definition of a safe man.
It makes me think about the difference between being an alarm clock and being a thermostat.
Ooh, I like that.
Like a young, hustling guy or a guy stuck in his ego is often an alarm clock. He demands attention, he's reactive, he's jarring, and he forces everyone in the house or the office to wake up and tune into his frequency, his stress, his anxiety.
That's a brilliant way to frame it, because the alarm clock man makes everyone else responsible for managing his emotions. If he's stressed, the whole house is stressed.
Exactly. But the man in midlife, who has actually done the work of shedding his ego, he becomes the thermostat. He quietly, steadily sets the climate of the room.
He absorbs the extremes.
Right. Imagine a 15-year-old comes home and starts screaming about something being unfair, or a massive crisis hits at work. The alarm clock man reacts with equal or greater volume to regain control.
Which just escalates everything.
But the thermostat man absorbs that extreme heat. He regulates himself, which implicitly gives everyone else permission to calm down. He absorbs the extreme so his family and his peers don't have to.
This raises an important question about how we lead. Because that thermostat analogy perfectly captures what Coach Shaun calls walking in quiet authority. It redefines leadership.
Leadership without ego.
Exactly. Which means leading by serving others, not by dominating them. It's the shift from wanting to be the hero of the story to being the guide.
Teaching by actually living the example rather than lecturing people.
You offer your wisdom to your kids, your younger colleagues, your community, but you don't demand that they receive it exactly how you gave it. You trust them to find their way.
It is influence that doesn't need credit.
Hmm.
And I think that directly challenges how we typically think about the concept of legacy.
Usually, we think of a legacy as this grand, recognized achievement, a tech founder building a rocket. a CEO with a building named after him.
A massive inheritance.
But Coach Shaun argues that true legacy is actually found in daily faithfulness. It's living well without applause.
Right. It's the mundane, repetitive act of just showing up,
Yeah.
being reliable,
Yeah.
keeping your word when absolutely no one is watching and no one is going to give you an award for it.
The legacy isn't the building. The legacy is being the dad or the mentor who never lost his temper when things went wrong.
Which brings us to the core evolution of this entire framework. If you step back and look at the whole arc of what Coach Shaun is writing about, the very definition of strength has entirely morphed over these 90 days.
It really has. In youth, strength was explosive. It was physical power. It was moving fast. It was forcing outcomes and bending the world to your will.
But as you transition into this new season, strength evolves into something much deeper.
It becomes enduring strength.
The strength to stay.
Yes. The strength to stay when it's hard instead of blowing up your life and starting over. The strength to forgive because you finally realize that holding on to resentment is just dragging an anchor that exhausts you.
Choosing meaning over momentum.
You stop running just for the sake of moving fast, and you make sure you're actually walking deliberately toward what matters. This is what true maturity actually looks like.
It's not about having all the answers anymore.
No, it's being secure enough in yourself to live with the complex questions.
And being fully, completely present right where you are. Not living in the past glory. Not anxiously projecting into the future. Just here.
Just present.
So let's bring this deep dive directly back to you listening to this right now. Maybe you are 35 and you are just starting to feel the early, quiet whispers of this physical and emotional shift.
Or maybe you are 55 and you are deep in the chaotic thick of reevaluating your entire life, feeling that profound fatigue.
Coach Shaun's reflections offer a powerful reminder that these middle years are not a mistake.
They aren't a waiting room between the vitality of youth and the decline of old age. They are the crucible. They are the season where everything you've lived, all the fragmented pieces of your experience, finally begin to integrate into wisdom.
But to access that wisdom, you have to be willing to actually do the work. You have to first accurately name the season you are in and accept your physical and emotional limits without bitterness or resentment.
You have to actively, intentionally shed the ego. You have to put down the heavy armor of impression management, the desperate need for constant approval, and the sheer bone-deep exhaustion of the hustle.
And finally, you have to step into that quiet, steady presence. You have to become the thermostat, not the alarm clock.
Enduring the hard things, serving the people around you, and living faithfully without needing an audience to validate your worth.
It's really about learning to travel lighter. And if midlife really is the painful but beautiful process of stripping away everything you aren't in order to reveal the absolute core of who you are, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on long after this deep dive finishes.
It's a powerful one.
I want you to consider the much older version of yourself. Picture the 80-year-old you.
That is the ultimate lens to view this transition through.
It really is. Picture him sitting in a chair looking back at you right now. Ask yourself, are the things you are stressing over today, the things keeping you relentlessly busy, the meetings you're agonizing over, the image you're trying to maintain, are those things actually building the kind of wise, safe, and unencumbered elder you want to become for your family tomorrow?
Or are you just pricing out sports cars, trying to speed away from a quiet truth you eventually have to face?
It is your season to decide. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.